Intro. This is the corniest thing you've ever made us do, Ryan said, leaning on the faded wooden sign. Greta exhaled and almost laughed. The four of us were standing in front of Halloween Hamlet, a combination carnival, corn maze, and gift shop. To say the place was cheesy would be charitable. The rides were small and looked like they hadn't seen maintenance since the 90s. The corn maze looked like it was maybe 4 or 5 acres at most. At least the gift shop appeared to be pretty big. All in all, I guessed *HH* took up about a dozen acres of unused field just outside of town. I can't believe you all dragged me out here on a Saturday for this hokey crap, Daria said. This is the first year it's been here, Ryan said. I don't know, I figured it might be a hidden gem or something. I tapped the sign Ryan was leaning on and a chunk of worm-eaten wood fell off. Maybe it should have stayed hidden, I said. Where's your sense of adventure? Greta asked, buckling on a fanny pack. Let's go get lost in the maze. I brought snacks. We walked over to the ticket booth. It sat alone next to the corn maze entrance like the last tooth in ruined gums. A few other groups milled about the parking lot and a small line had formed. It was early yet and *HH* hadn't done much advertising as far as I could tell. Leave it to Ryan to find any weirdness within a 100-mile radius. Tom, did you remember to bring cash? He asked. I made a show of patting my pockets before pulling out my wallet. Tommy, if you cover my ticket, I'll buy you lunch, Daria promised. I only brought my card. Fine, but I'm also ordering dessert. We only had to wait in line for 5 minutes. When we reached the booth, I winced. The ticket seller was grinning at us, teeth shining with the overly white glare of bad veneers. Everything about the guy seemed fake. Bad spray tan, thick hair plugs, even his skin appeared pinched and too tight like he'd overdosed on Botox. It was impossible to tell if he was 30 or 60 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, the ticket seller said in an accent I couldn't place, welcome to Halloween Hamlet. We bought our tickets, the creepy dude staring at us the whole time. Before we could leave, he leaned in close and winked, then spoke to us in a conspiratorial whisper. The gift shop and rides are on the other side of the corn maze. It shouldn't take more than 15 or so minutes to get through. Word of warning, though. If you cheat or try to take a shortcut through the maze, you'll all regret it. The ticket seller's grin dropped with the last line. I felt his eyes follow us as we walked into the corn maze, but when I looked back, he was already helping the next group. Weird, Ryan muttered. It's not like we even need to try hard to cheat. Heck, Tom, you're probably tall enough to peek over the corn on your tiptoes. And skinny enough to be mistaken for a scarecrow, Greta added. Keep it up. I'll lead you all to your doom. The four of us spent the next few minutes wandering around the crowded maze. Daria quickly became our unofficial navigator, ushering us past slow-moving families and making decisive turns. We all quickly became lost. I don't want to rush anything, Greta said, but I have to pee so bad. So bad. Ryan stopped. Okay, it's been fun, but I'm calling it time to cut through the rows. I felt a slight flutter in my stomach. Why don't we give it another few minutes? 'Cause I'm about to wet myself, dude? Greta said, already poking at the cornstalks. Which way do you think the bathrooms are? Well, judging by the budget of what we've seen so far, I'm guessing it's porta potties and not fresh ones, Ryan guessed. Yeah. Daria shook her head and suddenly cut through the closest row. We followed. I brought up the rear. It was a tight fit weaving between the stalks. They seemed taller from inside the rows than when they were just bordering the maze. A cloud passed over the sun, dropping a cool shadow over the field. I shivered and kept my eyes on Ryan's red flannel shirt. We all joked he was cosplaying as a lumberjack lately. Ahead of him, I caught an occasional glimpse of Greta or Daria pushing through the corn. It was hard to tell which since they both had black hair and similar white hoodies. The rows seemed to go on much farther than they should. Eventually, though, I stepped out from the corn into a clear space. My relief didn't last longer than it took me to look around. We were still inside the maze, only on a much wider path. I think we got turned around, Ryan said. We didn't, Daria said. It was a straight shot to get here. I guess the maze is bigger than it looks. Greta was stomping her feet. Okay, we're all good friends here. This can't wait. She disappeared into another row of cornstalks. Don't leave me, Greta yelled back. We won't, Daria replied. Promise? Just be quick and watch out for snakes. What? Rakes, Ryan yelled back after a few moments. Daria meant, rakes. Cornfields are lousy with them this time of year. I hate you all. You shouldn't know WW. I froze when I heard Greta shout. Hey, I was only kidding, Daria said, frowning. Look, don't mess with us. Greta came rushing out of the rows holding her hand to her chest. I saw a splash of cherry red soaked into her hoodie. Jesus, Daria said, running to help. Oh my God, you're bleeding. Ryan pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and moved towards the girls. What happened? I asked, eyeing the stalks where Greta had come from. Something cut me, Greta said while Ryan wrapped up her sliced palm. I don't know what. Daria was already pushing through the corn carefully. After a few seconds, she called back. You guys should see this. Ryan pushed the strange stalk, wary of where he placed his fingers. Thorns? He asked, pointing at the curved barbs that covered the corn plant from the roots up. They really want you to stay on the path, Greta muttered, pressing her injured hand against her chest. There are more here, I said. Dozens of the thorn stalks were threaded in among the rows. Ryan touched a barb and yanked his hand away. Even a light brush was enough to draw blood. This can't be legal, he said, sucking on the cut. I'm calling OSHA or whatever the corn equivalent is. Farmers only? Daria suggested. Nobody laughed, not even her. A sudden breeze blew through the field, causing the stalks to bend and ripple. It almost looked like they were reaching for us. The shadow still hadn't left the sun from earlier and it was much cooler and darker than I would have liked. We should go back to the path, I said. Ryan stood on his tiptoes trying to see over the rows, but he wasn't even close. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or if the plants were getting taller. Fine, he agreed, but when we get out of this maze I'm punching that weird carnival barker dude right in the kidney. Kidneys. It was a short walk back to clear ground. From there we all agreed to just keep taking right turns until we hit a dead end. If that happened, we'd retrace our steps and try left turns. It was a small maze, we could see both entrance and exit from the parking lot. There was no way it would take us more than 30 minutes at most to solve just by brute forcing it. I lost track of time through the slog of lefts and rights and dead ends, but it was at least an hour, probably 2. Every 10 minutes or so, one of us would try to make a call, but there was never any signal. I'm not sure when the clouds moved in exactly. I didn't notice them while we were trying to keep track of the turns we made. But when I felt the temperature drop, I looked up for the sun and saw only a sky of black clouds rough as shredded wool. Being lost, all of the weirdness, I think I could have handled it if Greta wasn't so sick. She was getting worse by the minute following her encounter with the thorns hidden in the rows. At first, whatever was wrong with her seemed minor, but it was accelerating. She complained of stiff limbs and joint pain, fatigue, and a deep numbness spreading through her body. Ryan was starting to show signs of being ill, too. It wasn't as severe as with Greta, but I had a hunch it was only a matter of time. Daria was clearly having the same concerns. She dropped back to walk next to me while the others moved ahead with Ryan carrying Greta, and starting to limp. They both need to get to a hospital immediately, Daria whispered. I know. I lifted my phone as high as I could in a vain attempt to catch a signal like a bug in a net. Damn it. Nothing. Do you think it was the plant? Daria nodded. Crazy though. I've never heard of poison corn. Or thorned corn, for that matter. Cathorn? That's clever, but Ryan stumbled in front of us and fell. He managed to turn and half catch Greta as they went down. She hit his chest hard. Daria and I both ran up as fast as we could. Ryan was laying on the ground looking winded, but Greta was in a bad way. Her body snapped and convulsed, kicking up dirt and dried corn husks. Neither Daria or I knew what to do other than to try to keep Greta from hurting herself while thrashing around. Thankfully, the spasms only lasted a minute at most, then she was still, eyes open but dull. Daria leaned in close to then jerked back with a gasp. What? I asked. What's wrong? Daria pointed at Greta's face. I looked closely and saw what caused her reaction. A piece of yellow straw the size of a fingernail was poking out from the corner of Greta's eye. Another length was jutting from a small cut on her cheek. There's more, Daria whispered, pulling back the sleeve of Greta's hoodie to expose more of the straw pushing through her skin. Oh God. Oh God, there's so much. Greta never woke up from her seizure. After he recovered, Ryan insisted on carrying her for as long as he could. When his limbs got too stiff, I took over. I carried her for hours, though I didn't know how many. The cloud cover meant that the day became night dark and winter cold. We all walked shivering through the maze, taking turn after turn after turn. I'm not sure when Greta stopped breathing. We were taking a break, huddled together. Greta leaned between Ryan and I. Straw was bursting through cuts all over her body and sprouting from her eyes and mouth. Something about her staring eyes caused me to press my fingers against her neck, then her wrist, then her neck again more urgently. She had no pulse and wasn't breathing. Ryan gave her CPR for so long I worried he'd pass out. I heard Greta's ribs crack under the pressure, then another, more horrible sound. It was like a rustling, the sound of compressed straw moving inside of her. Sobbing, Ryan kept trying to bring her back until Daria and I gently pulled him away. He wanted to bury Greta, but the ground was cold and almost frozen and we didn't have any tools anyway. Eventually, he draped his flannel shirt over her like a makeshift shroud, leaving him in his undershirt despite the cold. I was afraid he would drop from the cold or the poison in him. It was moving slower than it did with Greta, but I could tell from his limp and exhaustion that he would share the same strange fate. Ryan must have known that, too, because he stopped suddenly on the path. I'm going to try to cut through again, he said, not looking back at Daria or I. Don't follow me. There might be more thorns. Stay here and try to stay warm. If I make it, I'll send help. If you don't hear anything in an hour or two, press on, okay? Ryan, Daria began, but he was already moving, stepping into the corn, disappearing in the The two of us stood, shivering and uncertain. It was getting so dark that we had to use our dying phones as flashlights. We didn't have to wait long for something to happen. Less than a minute later, we heard a scream and then the sound of running coming from the rows. Ryan burst back onto the maze path, eyes wide and wild, chest heaving. In the corn, faces and, we have to. Ryan's panting was cut short when a hand slithered out from the stalks and grabbed his ankle. It was too dark for me to see the source of the hand from the glow of my phone, but I could just make out pale, too tight skin stretched over long fingers. A second hand emerged from the corn, then another and another, then a dozen or more, all latching onto Ryan. He screamed and struggled until one white palm covered his mouth. Before Daria or I could reach him, the hands dragged Ryan back into the blackness between the stalks. Daria made to follow, but I pulled her back. We can't, I said. You know we can't. So we leave him? Daria shouted. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Daria hesitated, eyes roaming the shadows in the rows. Ultimately, she didn't chase after Ryan. I kept waiting for a scream, but there was nothing. Only the sound of the breeze rustling the corn. Then nothing at all. Somehow, the silence was worse than any scream. It was a long time before either of us moved. Daria was the first one to take her eyes away from the spot where Ryan disappeared. She began walking silently forward. I followed her. We kept following the maze. It might have been hours or a few days. Our phones died, so we walked in complete darkness, unable to check them for time, though the clocks in them seemed wrong ever since we We walked and walked and walked and walked, too afraid to go into the rows, too tired to stop trying to find an exit. Compared to how Greta and Ryan met their ends, Daria's death was mundane. That didn't make it any less horrible. I always figured that, in a survival situation, hunger was the biggest threat. But it was thirst that got us both, and so damn fast. We kept stumbling and walking got harder and harder. I was thirsty, then viciously thirsty, then a terrible fog crept into my brain. Daria fell and I sat next to her. We talked then, though I can't remember what about. I kept going in and out of consciousness. When Daria stopped talking and then breathing, I pulled myself together enough to lay her on the path and to close her eyes. My hands were shaking. I'm sure I would have cried if my body could spare the water. A sudden, searing brightness filled the world. I looked up and saw that the clouds were gone and the sun was out. I glanced down at the path. Daria's body was gone. I was alone. Dazed, I stumbled up from my knees and took in my surroundings. I was still in the maze, but the path was narrower and the corn was shorter. And I could see the exit. The next part one don't remember well, and most of it I was told about later. Apparently, I was found wandering down the highway, dehydrated and sobbing. Some kind Samaritan rushed me to the hospital. Once I was recovered enough to talk to the police, I told them about the maze and my friends. They didn't believe me. Of course, they didn't. When they checked the field I sent them to, there was no sign of the Halloween Hamlet. All signs of it were gone from the internet when I went looking later. It was like it never existed. Officially, Ryan, Greta, and Daria are still considered missing. The unofficial speculation is that the four of us went on some drug binge in the woods and they got lost or had accidents or maybe just left. My memories of the strange things in the maze were also chalked up to a bad trip. But I know the truth. I know what took my friends. Who took my friends. These days I'm not doing so great, but I manage. I spend most of my time driving around or online searching for any signs of a carnival or fair going by Halloween Hamlet. I'll find it again, eventually. That's why I keep an axe and a few gallons of gasoline in the trunk of my car. The gas is for the corn maze, for a fire that will burn it down to ashes. The axe is for the creep in the ticket booth.